threats that put the future of life on this planet in question are all coming from the same source. And it is a man-made source, but it's not the man-made source that you're told. It's a relatively small group of individuals at the top levels of power, which are way above any elected officials, that far above their authority level. And they have many aspects of the agenda of destruction that they're working with. One of the biggest ones is affecting things happening in the atmosphere. And you know that the biosphere and the whole Earth has systems that are very intricate and delicate for maintaining balances in the weather and other things like that. And we're supposed to be breathing pure air. So at the moment, as I'm sure all of you are aware, we have disruption happening in the normal climate of the planet, but it's mostly or all due to man-made effects. However, they're not the fault of the general population. They're being done intentionally through something that is, with undue respect, I think, called geoengineering, and it's affecting weather, and it's also putting contaminants into the atmosphere that generally fall down to the earth, poison everybody, poison the systems of agriculture, and do a lot of other things. So we're interested in solutions, as always, to these problems that are peaceful, harmonious, and effective. And so we've had people on the show that have had various technologies that have been devised to harmonize the weather and offset the damage caused by the residue from the high altitude spraying. But one of the ones that I am really interested in and wanted to get on was a man named Harry Rhodes in the UK, who has an amazing understanding and awareness of some of these technologies that have incredible potential and have actually been used, witnessed, and some amazing things have been happening. So Harry agreed to come on the show tonight, which I thought was incredibly great. And he's with us tonight. We're going to talk about all these things in the degree of detail that he wants to go into. And thanks for being with us, Harry. I'm really happy that you're here.
Yeah, good evening. It's really good to be here.
Yeah. So, listen, I want to go back, as I do with most of our guests, and I want you to be introduced to the audience in full context as the person that you are. So I want to go back before you got involved in any of this, saying where it was that you came from in your background and what steps led up to getting interested in this particular technology that we're going to talk about.
It all started when I had a solar panel kit on my roof.
Okay.
A reasonable system, 4 kilowatts. Fantastic to have it. It's dropped my electric bill no end, and we're in the system where we get paid for having it as well.
Yeah, you had it connected to the grid, but you were producing the electricity.
Yeah, I got in just at the right time, so it was making good money as well.
Right.
And then one day I noticed that in the early days you think, right, you're watching it all the time, it's like a new toy. And then one day I noticed it forecast sunshine, and the sunshine was out, and then I looked at the output, and it had gone from nearly 4 kilowatts to about 900 watts, which I thought, that's unusual. And I went out and checked the roof and what have you. But I did notice there was like all these lines in the sky, which I hadn't noticed before. And then a week or two passed, and then I noticed it happened again. And then I asked somebody, I says, well, does that affect solar panels? And they said, oh, them are chemtrails. I said, what? Sorry? It says they're chemtrails, they spray.
Who were you asking for this information? Who was willing to say the word chemtrails?
It was a friend I came across that I didn't realise they were an activist. And and one thing led to another, and then I went on YouTube and typed chemtrails, and then boom! I mean, there's thousands of videos on chemtrails, and I thought, this person isn't joking. This is for real. And and then it went from there. The rabbit hole goes on forever.
Yes.
And then it brings you into subjects that and we've had a discussion on, and people listening probably know that you've got the elites, You've got the vaccines with the poisons in. You've got the chemtrails without 8 different agendas to do with energy, weather control, people control, food control, water control, and it's endless.
Yeah.
And it's quite unnerving when the penny drops, because there's no going back. It's like you've pulled the plug on the Matrix, and everything starts to fall into place. The whole jigsaw puzzle becomes one big picture.
Yeah, it's still being resisted by the power structure, of course. We had a newspaper article in our local paper last night clarifying. It took a picture of the beautiful local sunset, and it said that the contrails made it even nicer. And they, just in case anybody had any conspiracy theories, they were definitely contrails, and they quoted the appropriate scientists to prove it.
Yeah, so they want to gag you before you can even open your mouth now.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so you found out that chemtrails were real, and what happened at that point?
Yeah, after speaking to quite a few other people, on Facebook, there's quite a group of people, and it gets quite intense. And I became an activist. I mean, I went the whole hog. I wanted to go. I even went to all of the elites' propaganda places where they were having solar radiation management conferences, and I would turn up there. I would speak to David Keith, Ken Caldera. All the world's top scientists were there talking and showing videos how they can do chemtrails and solar radiation management.
You met the chemtrail celebrities, basically.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I went with Terry Lawton, who has been another activist longer than me. We were in Germany. This is dead funny, this is. We went to Germany, and there's 500 people. It's the world's largest and longest geoengineering international conference. And we had Alan Robock, and there was some... this is in mainstream media. It was on CNN. And Alan Robock was interviewed by them, and it was on about the fixing of the temperatures and the figures, and it was blatant. And I was talking to Alan Robock. We got this on video, and Terry Lawton says, what about the ClimateGate affair with all the emails that came out that people found and admitted that all the figures were fixed? And I tell you what, he ran off like he'd got diarrhea, because he just didn't want to speak about it. He shot off.
Who ran away? I couldn't hear you.
This was Alan Robock, and I was with Terry Lawton.
Right.
And the fact is, when you've got the truth, it doesn't matter what lies and propaganda they come out with. You can cut straight through it to the bone.
Yeah.
And these guys know it.
So was that, you said that conference was covered on mainstream media, right?
No, Alan Robock's comments about this being exposed was.
What were his comments admitting that they were doing geoengineering, or saying that it wasn't real?
No, he was saying that no, we don't fix the figures. It was that was an accident that happened. But I mean, it's all come out since. The figures have been fixed, and obviously they're saying we've got global warming, which is now absolutely ridiculous, because we've got a solar minimum. Even today, as I speak to you, you're in the States. Record temperature after record temperature of freezing and lows are being hit on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's really cold out here. The whole huge area of the West is way below normal.
Yeah. And of course, this is what they're doing today. The solar minimum, please people, look it up on YouTube and type in solar minimum. You will be blown away. The solar minimum is real. The patterns of the last hundreds of thousands of years in the ice bore cores, it fits absolutely perfect to the solar minimum we've got since 2010. And this is what's going to happen.
You're talking about the degree of activity in solar flares and things like that?
Absolutely. The solar flares in the sun, whilst people think are a bad thing, are absolutely life-giving to this planet, and it produces ultraviolet light. That frequency band is one of the sole frequencies of the light, which not only kills bacteria and viruses and fungal spores, it actually makes plants grow and controls the temperature of the planet. But once that starts to cool down, it's like doing the dimmer switch on a light. All life starts to suffer when it starts to go dull.
So you're saying solar flares are not a mistake of nature?
No. When a solar flare kicks in, Earth's magnetic field increases exponentially. And that's instant. Within split seconds, Earth is totally related to the Sun.
Right.
It's almost like there's a cable attached to it, but Earth's magnetic field increases with a solar flare. And thankfully, the Earth's magnetic field increasing gives the Earth protection. But what's happened with this the solar inactivity, Earth's magnetic field is shrinking, which means we start getting a change in the structure of the Earth. That means we get volcanoes, we get earthquakes, and that's what's happening right now, today. In fact, 2 days ago, a massive earthquake kicked off in Asia. And
okay.
they reckon the particulates are already well in the upper atmosphere, which is going to cause cooling even more so. But coming back to chemtrails, this
Yes.
is what they are doing, folks. Even though we're having a natural solar minimum, they are actually upping the chemtrails massively, absolutely massively, to hijack the situation. Never let a good disaster
even
go to
here
waste.
in the middle of extreme cold, the spraying is very heavy.
Yes.
I mean, it's amazing, and it's heavy when it's hot, and it's heavy when it's cold. I mean, whatever they're doing in all kinds of temperature conditions. It's interesting.
Yeah.
And apparently they have a lot of different recipes in the chemtrails that they're putting in. It's not uniform all over the place.
They've even been putting viruses in.
Yeah,
Funded by the pharmaceutical companies that make not millions, not hundreds of millions, but billions of pounds out on it.
People are talking about a much more severe strain of influenza virus right now that's running around, and they're connecting it with the spraying as well.
Yes. Over Europe, back in 2015, I noticed some massive spraying, and 5 days after that, once it spread through Europe, the influenza spread all the way across Europe, and thousands of people were affected by it, probably millions, and it's all deliberate. I mean, there was over 1.25 million square miles of chemtrails, and it looked like a tartan kilt from Scotland.
I noticed that all through the major universities of the world, especially in Europe, they actually have career programs now where you can learn to be a geoengineer, and not just for the air, but geoengineering the ocean, the sky, the land, everything.
Yes.
So that all the defects of nature can be corrected.
We don't fully understand everything that's going on. All we know is something is seriously wrong, and the minds right at the top are very, very evil.
Right.
And human life, it's like all life on the planet is enemy number one. Because they...
Yeah, well, and what they're telling us is that the general population is the enemy, and whatever, gets rid of that would be the best thing for the earth.
Yes. And, amazingly, people go on about, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. I mean, years ago, well-known people were saying, well, AI is a good thing, and the Matrix, it's all fiction. The Matrix is actually now real. Google, only a few days ago, is now encouraging parents to get rid of the children, do away with the bodies, and load everything that's in their brains, the personality, the memories and everything, and put them inside the D-Wave computer.
Right, the ultimate religion that has finally figured out how to reach perfection, right? Merge into AI and computers.
Yes. And your child will live forever inside the computer.
Of course, yeah. And no problems, and you don't even have to go to school.
Yep. I'd hate to think if you had them on an hard drive and your computer crashed and then you'll never see your children again.
Yeah, it's very strange, but I think they actually are serious about that stuff.
Yes, they are.
And they believe that's where they want to go, and that's why it's okay to sacrifice the biosphere, because, who needs a biosphere if you live in cyberspace?
Yep. And the ultimate 10% goal, as the Guidestones were saying, is untrue. It's not 90% reduction, it's 100% reduction. Because
you're one of the few people that agrees with me on that wouldn't say that I'm crazy for that statement.
Yeah, the sad thing? When people realise it is reality, it will be too late.
Yeah, there has to be the solution handled by a relative minority, because trying to convince everybody is pretty much a waste of time, I think.
Yeah. I've just gone on my screen now, which will come out on the video. I'm just doing some screenshots, etc. while we're talking. And the whole Earth is covered in a variety of frequencies. Now, some of it can be because of solar minimum, but only 2 days ago, HARP kicked in. There are about 15 other HARP stations around the planet, and much more than that, in fact. We have ionizers. We've got massive transmitters on Ascension Island. We've got super dawns all over the place, one on the Falkland Isles, that send these weird frequencies on the microwave satellite. You can see them. And one went around virtually the whole of the planet. And it went from west to east.
Tell me what you're describing. You said super something. I couldn't understand what you were saying.
Super Dawn is an array of transmitters in a straight line with arched aerials. And when they fire it up, each one is a slightly different frequency. And it creates massive lines in the upper atmosphere. It can even create plasma.
Okay, so is this like a step beyond the regular HARP type array?
They claim that it's for studying the weather, but of course everything that they do, they do study the weather, and it tells you the wind directions, and they call them wind profilers as well. But it also heats the upper atmosphere because the frequencies are microwaves, which means the microwaves heat the upper atmosphere, which means it gives them control on wind direction. It can push the atmosphere out from the Earth by over 250 miles. Now,
that doesn't sound like a very good idea.
Well, it is to them. Yeah.
Some of their experiments, they have said, well, this might ignite and blow up the whole atmosphere, but we just have to try it, in the interest of science.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it actually came from after World War II. And this is when some of the evil scientists came to the States and carried on the funding. All
Project
deliberate.
Paperclip, right?
Yeah, all deliberate, all intended.
Yeah.
But the subject that I got into, after meeting David Keith, the world's #1 top geoengineer, a very close friend financially with Bill Gates.
Yeah, they have a lot in common. Right?
They're all in it. They all know each other. Alan Robock, Ken Caldera. It's criminal. I would love to see every one of them locked up in prison for a long time.
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't seem to be about to happen.
And so I realised that even when you meet people like David Keith and embarrass the backside off him on stage by saying there is a massive reaction between mercury and aluminium that causes Alzheimer's disease, the #1 killer for women in the UK and many other countries, and #3 killer for men, and now it's showing up in children. Autism, by the way, is just an extension of that from vaccines.
Yeah, I totally agree. Where the thing that really clinches that and makes it obvious is that there have been some large pediatric practices, one with about 40,000 kids over several years, and the amount of autism, just in case people were wondering if it was reduced since they did not vaccinate any of those kids, the autism rate was zero.
Yes. My
That pretty
wife's,
much,
my wife's from
describes the
Burma.
situation.
Yeah, autism's never been heard of in Burma, Asia. And then the moment they bring vaccines out, suddenly it becomes a problem to that country when it never was.
Just a strange genetic change for no reason, right?
Yeah. But even at the low level of common sense, and you can prove it, these people know exactly what they are doing. It's totally deliberate. And they want to cover it up. Google now blocks information on things like that. It becomes difficult to share and find, and suddenly it disappears and you can't find it again.
Right.
But it's so blatant that instead of just posting on Facebook, and that's all they want to do, they can lock in on Facebook forever. You can post 1 million posts on Facebook about vaccines and chemtrails and it won't stop one.
Right.
Sad to say.
Right.
This isn't to knock activists, but it's just a fact. It doesn't make a scrap of difference. And that's when I got into what can we do about the issue of things like chemtrails.
I mean, there's almost not even a point in knowing about any of this stuff unless you come up with a solution.
Yeah. I mean, the only alternative is you go down to the government and you drag them all out physically, which I'm not encouraging to do, by the way.
At this point, I don't think that's even possible.
No.
I think they would like people to try that approach because they have some really fancy new weapons they'd like to try out.
Yes. They've even got weapons that they can put a frequency through your body and you've got to go to the toilet there and then, within seconds.
Yeah, that's if they want to be nice to you. Otherwise, it's worse.
Yes. Yeah. And you've got 5G coming out, which is the kill switch, by the way, folks. Absolutely.
Yeah.
They can pinpoint you to within 2 or 3 feet.
They set those up with massive power supplies, maybe 100 times more than what's needed, and it's not just because they're being careful.
Well, the old Morse code machine worked on 2 or 3 volts, and it could go for thousands of miles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's right. And now they need big fat cables 1 inch across with...
Right. It makes you wonder what the point of the system actually is, huh?
Yes.
So what was you realized in talking to these celebrity chemtrail people who were explaining how good it was that you weren't going to solve the situation in a debate. So what did you do?
No, I mean you could commandeer the highest court in the world and it'd still be fixed.
Yeah.
So what a helpless, ridiculous situation. The elites have penetrated so far in. Yeah, the swamp goes on forever.
It's all the way down to local level government, I think.
Yep. So, I mean, I seen a video that's been banned now. You cannot find it. A member of Parliament stood up, an old gentleman. He stood up and he says, I hear that the UK government has been bribed by billions of pounds to sell out. He says, and I'm talking, this is for real. This was about 25, 30 years ago. He disappeared within 24 hours. Nobody ever saw him again.
Right. Oh, you mean not just the video, but the person disappeared?
The person disappeared.
Yeah, it was probably really irritating to have him saying stuff like that.
Yeah, and there's obviously members of Parliament that would sell the soul for all that sort of money. And did do, by the way. So I came to the situation that this is a worldwide problem, and physically, is there an answer to it? And I felt rather helpless because no matter what you could do about it, you felt it's unstoppable.
Right. Well, you see these unmarked, generally white-colored aircraft really high up in the air, and they're going across all jurisdictions. It appears to be something that all the national governments are complicit in, or some of them don't know about,
Yeah.
and it's just about worldwide at this point.
Yes. So I've had a religious background,
Uh-huh.
and I realise there are there are energies in life you come across that are more than just a theory,
Well,
and there's different levels of energy and consciousness that can have a massive effect on your life and your future. And it was that point that I called upon that energy and thought there has to be something more that we can consciously call on that's a positive energy that can make a change.
yes.
And that's what I did. I just totally dropped all what I was doing. I got on my hands and knees and I said, if you are out there, give me something that I can do and I will do it 1000%. And it was quite emotional for me, and without getting into too much detail, and I then left it, and 12 hours later came a picture of a cloudbuster on my screen. I don't know even to this day where it came from. And the cloudbuster was massive. It was on the back of a cart. It got about 30-foot pipes on it.
So for just assume that people have no idea what a cloudbuster is. It sounds like something that, like for Ghostbusters, except for clouds.
Yeah.
So why don't you explain from scratch what that was, and if you even knew what it was at that time?
I didn't know what it was for. In fact, I just saw a cloudbuster, but I knew within an instant that was what I was looking for. How weird.
So this big thing with a pipe like a shiny steel stovepipe, except horizontal, right?
Yeah, this was.
What did that picture look like?
I've got it on my screen now. It was a massive trailer, and I believe it was a machine gun, a heavy artillery type machine gun beam with bearings on that rotated left and right and up and down, and it was converted to take the pipes. Now, just to go back a few steps, there was a gentleman called Wilhelm Reich. He was harassed by the governments in every country, and he was he came over to the USA. Now, he discovered a life energy that permeated everything that we know, and he realised that this life energy was to do with cell reproduction, the human spirit, consciousness, and the more he found out about it, the more intrigued he was. And one day he was having works done on a property, and he lived by the lake, and he accidentally trod on one of these tubes, like a scaffold tube, and the water ran down the tube, and when he took his foot off it, it ran back out of the tube again, and as he turned around he noticed a wave go across the lake, similar to a heat wave, but he knew what a heat wave looked like, and this was definitely not a heat wave, but he didn't know what it was. He repeated it and it happened again, and he noticed it changed the atmosphere as it went across the lake. So, cut a long story short, he replicated this. He made similar pipes and he put water through them, and he realised when he pointed it up into the sky, it changed the weather, that it would remove clouds. And after experimenting for quite some time, he realised he could even make it rain. And as with orgon, he called this energy orgon. Tesla called it ether. People who deal with healing, it's Reiki, and lots of other names you can come up with. And so he, in other words, he wanted to reproduce this technique and continue to experiment with it, and that is exactly what he did. And the cloudbuster was then invented, and of course the rest is history. There were a few things that he did that was secret, and it improved even more so. And grounding was quite important, which he didn't realise at first, but he ran water through it. Now, water is absolutely phenomenally intriguing. I've said this before, I'm sorry if you've heard it, but it's such an important thing. One drop of water can have memory for millions of years. And in a laboratory, they recorded 1,000 Blu-ray DVDs onto a drop of water, and it could be replayed again. The other drop of water they took, they loaded digitally the books from 13 large libraries, and every book was present in that drop of water. So
interesting.
That's my.
So they discovered how to put information into water and how to read it back out again.
Yes, to record, and yes, to reread it.
I don't remember that being mentioned to the general public, though.
No, it's not. So water is related to the etheric flow as well. I've said this before. If you haven't heard this is definitely mind-blowing. We've always been taught the process of rain, moisture, condensation, and rain evaporates in the atmosphere, cools down, drops as rain, goes in the rivers and back to the sea.
Right.
Dead simple. A 5-year-old can understand it.
That's about the age they start teaching you that too.
Yes. And it's very easy to understand until someone says, well, where does all the weight come from? And we're not talking of a few tons, we're talking of hundreds of millions of tons.
You mean like the weight of the water in the ocean?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, you can have 3, 4, 5, 6 inches of water as rain fall in a few hours. In fact, happens regularly in floods. And yet, now you're talking of hundreds of millions of tons, and that weight has to come from somewhere at the point of energy condensation. And where does all the weight appear from when it's supposed to be floating around in the atmosphere?
Well, don't they say that it's floating around because each drop is so small that the weight to mass or weight to size ratio is small enough so that it can get blown around on the wind?
Yeah, but 1 million tons still exists.
Oh yeah, altogether, sure.
And it isn't at 50 and 60,000 feet in the upper atmosphere because the air pressure isn't good enough. All the air pressure is down near ground level. The higher you go, the less air pressure, the less dense, the less water it can carry. So the interesting thing is the bulk of the weight is closer to ground level.
Yeah.
So there's only a small area that weight can actually be in as water and condensation.
Okay.
And that makes it even more intriguing. Now, if 100 million tons was to drop off a crane, the opposite effect of the weight dropping would mean the crane would lift up. You know, when you lift weight off a car suspension, the car rises because the weight's disappeared. But the atmosphere doesn't do that. When 100 million tons is dropped out the atmosphere doesn't suddenly shoot up because the weight's disappeared. The rain drops gently and the atmosphere carries on as though nothing happened.
Okay, so you're saying that when air gets drier, it doesn't start rising?
Not to the degree that you could calculate it on a calculator for millions and hundreds of millions of tons now.
Okay. So you're getting clues that there's something going on that is not obvious, right? Something behind.
Yes. So in the similar way that when the sun reacts and explodes with the solar flares and the earth reacts instantly within a split second, this is the same form of energy that rain and ether and the works that even date back to Tesla is what's going on. And a lot of it is the geometric algorithms in nature, the secret numbers. It's all related to the etheric charge and vortexes. So vortexes are the imploding vortex is the most powerful form of energy in the universe, without exception. Supernovas.
Is this the understanding that Wilhelm Reich came to that allowed him to design something to affect the weather?
Not really. He was experimenting with the energy life force. In one way, he didn't realise that was involved with it. I think later in his life he probably did realise that, because a gentleman called Trevor James Constable took over from Wilhelm Reich, and he realised he was into radionics. Radionics is where you can affect something instantly from a place that is thousands of miles away.
Okay.
And he worked in the Navy, and he'd had a responsible position as in the radar and working on the ships. But he had the privilege. He developed a superior form of cloudbuster in what he called a translator. And in that, he found by putting two mirrors back to back inside a tube with a few other specific dimensions, you could massively affect the weather conditions. And if you type a search in Google, Trevor James Constable etheric rainmaking, which is in Vimeo, you will see 12 times where he affected the weather. He took the forecasts, he deployed, and he changed the weather. They even forecast a fortnight no rain, and that would be the ideal time to take a picnic holiday. And he brought in rains to a drought area, and the weather literally 12 hours later gave flash flood warnings. And he filmed it at the end of the week from his hotel window: lightning, thunder, torrential rains, the streets full of water, and the drought was ended.
So are you saying that the translators were like a step beyond the cloudbuster, kind of the next generation?
Yes.
Okay, let just for context and to make sure we don't skip any steps, let's go back for the people that are trying to understand what the cloudbuster was, what it looked like, and how it worked.
The cloudbuster was a set of hollow tubes, and preferably insulated on the outside. So a
You're talking about big ones, right? Like
Yes.
several inches diameter.
Yes, the Wilhelm Reich one, at least 2 inches. And they can
And
be
how
anything
long-
up to
how
10.
long?
10, 15, even 20 foot long.
Okay, so they can kind of start getting a picture of what a bunch of these tubes, I guess in a parallel bunch, right? Held right close together?
Yeah, a fair few inches apart.
Okay.
They 3 or 4 inches apart, 2 inches across to 3 inches across.
Okay.
And set in a frame so it could be balanced just purely for physical reasons, so you could point it at different angles and degrees and compass directions.
So it's just a bunch of empty tubes, basically, right?
Yes, but on the end of the tubes, Wilhelm Reich had a flexible coiled hose, similar to the shower hose that's like a metal coil inside with an insulated coating on the outside. And he connected each one of these to one of the tubes. So if he had 10 tubes, incidentally, it's best with odd numbers. The etheric chaos is much, much improved if it's an odd number. And preferably different lengths as well. So
and the hoses that you're talking about that have to go on each tube, those are metal also, right?
Yes, flexible type of conduit, flexible hose. With
like the flexible water tubing, same type of thing.
Yes, with a metal coil inside.
Okay.
And then what he did, he put these into what he called an orgon box, which water was sprayed in, and it generated an etheric flow or an etheric charge. We call that
A box that all those tubes were inside of?
Yes.
Okay, so that big box, I mean, 20 feet long or something to get the tubes in, right?
No, it would be something like 3 foot by 3 foot square.
But I thought you said the tubes were like 20 feet, 10 or 20 feet long.
Yes. No, they sit on the frame in the air. And
okay, so is the box around like one end of the tubes? So I'm trying to get a picture.
Imagine 10 tubes all in a rack.
All right.
One end is pointing up in the sky.
Okay.
And the other end is actually got tubes attached to them, hose pipes.
Okay.
And I've got a picture on here. They sometimes on the end of the tubes they could put a single box where the water could be sprayed in, so all the tubes are linked together.
Okay.
But normally each tube would have a pipe coming off and then going into a water spray box. Now it's been developed even better still. I make them with what's called a water capacitor, and what that is, those tubes go into a steel barrel which sits inside a plastic barrel. So the plastic insulates it, and the steel barrel, or the steel bin inside, it can be galvanized, for example. These tubes are hanging freely inside the steel drum, and then that drum's lowered into a large plastic drum, and then a plastic lid's placed on top with holes in where the pipes go through, and then you spray water inside. That's exactly what a capacitor is. And that,
go ahead.
When water sprayed, the etheric flow and charge goes up through the tubes, through the pipes, and reacts with the atmosphere instantly wherever you point it. And one amazing thing that absolutely blew me away is that you can point it through the earth and have exactly the same effect where it comes out of the earth on the other side, and it will stop typhoons, hurricanes. We've got the joy now where we go on satellite and we know exactly where to put the block.
You know, this is also really interesting because there are people who say they have proofs that the earth is not round. I'm sure you've heard from them.
Spot on.
Right?
Yep.
And so this is like your proof that they're incorrect, because if the earth were flat, you could not do what you just described.
Absolutely, 1000% correct. And it happens every time we do it, without fail. And if the earth was flat, it would never, ever work.
Right, so you're calculating based on a rough spherical model of the globe exactly what geographical location you hit when you go down through the earth.
Yes,
right?
In fact, we use
so if
Google
you were in
Earth
the U.S.,
ruler.
you could hit India by pointing it straight down, basically, that sort of thing.
Very, very accurately by using declination and inclination charts.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So we've calculated the curvature of the Earth, and if you point down, say, 15 degrees, that will go through the Earth and come out around about 3,000 miles away.
Okay.
But we can do it
yeah,
very,
you know,
very
and
accurate.
when you're making those calculations, sometimes these people that say that the Earth is flat, whom I don't criticize, because there are all kinds of unusual things that we don't know about, and you have to stay open. But one of the things they say to prove that it's flat is that at a certain distance, like for example on the ocean, you should not be able to see the shore, and or another ship, and they can see it for too much distance, and they say that proves that it's all flat.
Yeah, I've seen other videos where the ship disappears over the horizon and you can only see the funnel.
Yeah, stuff like that. Right. So anyway, what you're describing, the technology, people have to realize, according to what we've all been taught in school, there's no basis for any of this stuff. But what makes you hopefully makes you consider it, is the fact that based on, if you want to test out any theory for anything, even if it's a totally new idea, even if it contradicts conventional so-called science, what you do is you analyze the theory and then you devise a test. And if the test works, there's a strong indication that your theory may be correct, even if nobody agrees with it.
Yes. For example, we have a team that deploys, and we have one in the United Kingdom, and there are about 20 of us.
Okay.
I've now got a satellite live in front of me, which is Weather Online, Europe.
Okay. Right.
And we deployed yesterday vertical to block the clouds. And because we're going to have a freeze out, by blocking the southwest, it brings the warmer air up and around Ireland and up to the North Atlantic. And that is exactly what's in front of me now.
Looking at your computer screen, in other words. Okay.
So, and that happens not once, but every single time we deploy that, that's exactly what happens.
Okay, so what do you mean when you say we deploy? I mean, remember that people don't know what you're talking about until we describe it.
Okay, Trevor James Constable developed what he called the translator, and that's in front of me now. It's like a tube. He even fitted them to helicopters. It's a specific...
Okay, so this is like the Cloudbuster, but smaller and just one tube instead of a whole bunch of tubes?
Correct. It has a second tube inside, and it has a special arrangement of mirrors.
In the tube?
Yes, and it's also got metallic layers and organic layers.
Okay.
Which comes back to Willem Reich about the life energy that is created by things like cells and silk cocoons. Them are
so you're saying the tube is not just a one-layer tube, it's got multiple layers, and some of those layers are metal and some are some kind of organic material.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, because it generates an etheric charge, ether is actually in the atmosphere, and it's concentrated in the first few miles from the ground up.
You want to tell people what ether is? I know that's a big subject, but I'm trying to catch all the words that you're using that are not in common vocabulary, or if they are, they're not understood.
Yeah.
So we want to include people here that start with no understanding of what you're saying, but they're interested. So they would ask, if they could, what's ether?
Well, first of all, I'll say what ether reacts with, and then it'll give you an idea of what ether actually is.
Okay.
Electricity cannot be present if ether is not present. Magnetics would not work without the presence of ether. Energy wouldn't react the way it does. Light wouldn't react the way it does. And Tesla said that ether is omnipresent, and that means that it's everywhere. Even if you've got the perfect vacuum in outer space, ether is present there too. So does
that mean it's not physical?
Well, it's very difficult. It reacts like electricity, but it also is a form of plasma. And you cannot put your finger on actually what it is. It also it reacts to a form of consciousness as well. So
it has some awareness in it.
It seems to be an entity of its own, but it doesn't act on its own behalf. Now, trust me, my life has been pure logic. I've written patents. I used to be an engineer in the coal mine. And 2 + 2 is 4. 1 and 1 is 2.
And nothing else can even be considered because it's obviously true.
Correct. You work things out logically. There is a question and there's a logical answer. With ether, that never works. It never stacks up. But you know that's the reaction it gets. And the interesting thing is the etheric flow reacts on the surface, and it loves shiny surfaces. And from a distance, from 50,000 miles, the Earth looks almost shiny and smooth. And the blue in the atmosphere is partly to do with the etheric reaction.
Okay.
So
even in mathematics, which engineers know is the most logical, left-brained system of reasoning that you could really come up with in a way is total logic. Even in mathematics, at the deeper levels of it, They have things like imaginary numbers and things that don't make rational sense, but they work when you use them.
Yes.
So I think even the really, you know, more experienced engineers who had gotten into those levels would understand that what you're talking about could be true, even though it makes no sense on a, you know, regular logical level.
Yes. I mean, look at the works of Tesla. The way he generated a certain frequency, a subsonic frequency, and it shook the whole street and the building he was in. People thought it was an earthquake. And
Yeah,
it was
that shouldn't
something like,
happen if regular conventional physics is the end of
yeah,
everything.
and it was like 4 watts. It's
Right.
like impossible, but it's all there in the records. That's what he did. He could send, he called it spanking energy around the planet. He could send a wave of energy around the planet and tell you where it was, and then hit it as it came overhead and sent it faster. That's all in the records. It's all there.
Wow.
And Tesla, one amazing, incredible statement that Tesla made, and he said that everything that Tesla ever learned was because he understood how the ether flows and works. Monumental statement.
How the ether flows and works, did you say?
Yes.
Okay.
And he realised none of these energies would work the way they would. Electricity won't work unless you understand how ether works. And of course, everything then became possible to him. Vortexes, the flow of electricity, how to get electricity to go through the air. Tesla actually generated a bolt of lightning for about 20 seconds. Permanent bolt of lightning from the atmosphere down to the earth.
One thing I wondered about his idea of wireless electricity generation is that, you know, we're seeing all these damaging effects of wireless 5G and 4G and the microwaves and the millimeter waves and all that stuff. Did he figure out a way to do wireless electric generation without it being harmful to anybody?
Would that being harmful? Not sure. Difficult, because the moment you start distorting frequency and energy lines, it does affect cells.
Yeah, exactly.
As a form of radiation, like microwaves.
Yeah.
But,
so maybe he just didn't get as far as the health considerations when they shut him down, realizing that it would disrupt the economic system that they wanted.
Yeah, everybody knows the reason they didn't do it Tesla's way was because they couldn't put a meter on it.
Yeah, that's the famous quote.
Yeah.
But the ether that you're talking about affecting with the cloudbuster and the translator, there's nothing harmful to humans about working with those, right?
Well, I'm glad you've said that, because it's absolutely the opposite. People find when they use a translator, the locality, even in a dry area, very, very regularly they have dew in the morning. Everything becomes soaking wet and moist. And of course, plants don't just thrive on rain. Like cactuses, they absorb the dew in the morning.
Right.
The birds drink the drops of dew in the morning if there's no rain.
Yeah.
And what translators do, the etheric flow from in the mantle itself reacts with the water level, and it pulls moisture up. The UK had fog for a couple of days, and when we go vertical, it tends to pull up from the below the ground like a form of moisture that sits as fog. That's very common.
What does it mean when you go vertical? What is that?
Vertical means, like, for example, we've had chemtrails and we've got like lots of rubbish in the atmosphere. They've been spraying upwind.
Yeah.
We go vertical, and generally it'll punch blue holes and it'll start to disintegrate. Trevor James Constable, who invented the translator, did it regularly.
Okay, so in other words, you mean pointing the translator straight up?
Yes. And you cover more of the atmosphere when you go at, say, 45 degrees. So people who are on the team understand this. The atmosphere, the densest part of the atmosphere is probably 13 miles. But if you go on the angle level with the Earth, you'll cover 10 times more than that. You can.
Okay, and how much of an effect out to the side of the path of the angle would be affected?
Thousands of square miles.
Okay, so it's not just hitting like a rifle would hit a small target. It's affecting a whole area.
Yes, it does. But having said that, we've pointed through the Earth. We've done a deployment, and here's some news for you, all you people listening. Cape Town was subject to a catastrophic drought. I'm talking of a large modern city with no water.
500,000 people or so, right?
Yeah. We're looking at 350 reservoirs, all virtually empty.
Mm-hmm.
3.5 weeks ago, we started deploying as a team from the UK and parts of Europe. We first of all deployed Central Africa and later down to South Africa and Cape Town. Within 18 hours of the first deployment, the weatherman announced a miracle. You can look it up. What ether does, it cools the upper atmosphere. They had snow and sleet and ice falling over certain areas, and there was rivers of ice and slush ice pouring into the reservoirs. There are videos on YouTube of it.
How long after the initial project started there was that?
Around about between 12 and 15 hours. And the weatherman said it's a miracle because we didn't forecast it. It appeared from nowhere. How do they explain that? We then deployed on Cape Town, and the next day we started causing 2 rotations, one east and one west of Cape Town, and that pulled rains up.
So Cape Town is in the southern hemisphere, right?
Right on the southern southwest tip of Africa.
Yeah, but I mean it's south of the equator, so that means that the low pressure systems would rotate clockwise, right?
Well, it creates 2 vortexes, a clockwise vortex and an anti-clockwise vortex.
Okay.
And that means if you get your target correct, you can draw in and steer it to where you want. That includes the jet stream, by the way.
So what's the current drought status of Cape Town?
After the first deployment, it was put forward by 4 weeks, and we brought rains on a number of occasions. It's now been put forward by nearly 3 months.
Now, what does that mean, put forward 3 months?
They had a D-Day where water had run out, even the taps on the streets.
I see.
And they said, that's it. We're out of water. There's nothing we can do.
Now they've got 3 months of water.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so what's the plan at this point?
Sorry, what was that again?
What is the plan at this point? Do you want to just keep increasing the rain until things get normal again?
We can do long distance deployments from 4,000 miles away. However, there's something that's related to Wilhelm Reich, and that is it's what we call dark energy, or DOR. There's a lot of bad feeling on the continent of Africa, and I'm talking about genocide, where tribes try to, warring factions, even the government, corruption in the government. Now, we've got plans, and it's almost complete now, to visit Africa. It's been kept fairly quiet, but there is a time and place that we will execute this, and a full-size Reich cloudbuster is going to be built in South Africa and deployed along with many other translators.
Okay.
And what it does, one thing I didn't fully explain is when people use translators, the whole area around the translator seems to have a life force that the birds even recognise. It's very, very common for people to get things like buzzards, kites. The garden starts filling with birds, slugs and snails. A moist atmosphere. we've even had one case. This is one in Adelaide in Australia. A 6-foot translator on a tripod was left in the garden, and the chili plant that was on a hanger trellis in the garden, it undid all of its windings from the trellis. It then released itself, collapsed across the yard, and started growing and climbed up the translator and wrapped itself around it. Now that's hard work for it to do that. And
well, especially if, like modern science says, the plants are just these inanimate objects there to be dominated by man like everything else, and that human beings are the only conscious life form in existence.
Yeah.
Probably in the universe, actually.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the effect it has. Now, this particular person, when I'm building the Cloudbuster, is just starting a cannabis farm, which is perfectly legal.
Okay, and are you talking about South Africa?
Yes. And that farm with a Cloudbuster in its presence of that size will absolutely thrive and flourish.
Right. So are the Cloudbusters, since you have the translators now and they're smaller and more compact, are the Cloudbusters where you want a larger scale effect?
Well, there are strategic places around the planet that the elites have weather modification equipment. Ascension Island, we've got the HARP one in Alaska, Russia's got some, China's got some, you've got the super dawns like in the Falkland Isles, and all these are to do with complete planetary weather control. Absolutely no doubt about it. On the island of Guam, I have a accounts book from 1973, and it's the US Government of Congress, and in there it speaks about funding for the Isle of Guam as a weather modification station.
Right.
And yet you get these idiot shills that come on. I mean, whoever wants to be a shill anyway? But these shills,
I guess they figure it's a good way to make a lot of money.
Well, yeah, somebody like, is it Les West?
I don't know, many of the newscasters are basically movie stars with a specialized area of expertise, which is they know how to look really authoritative and condescending and scientific and just kind of explain to you in very slow sentences that this is something you would never understand, and this is the reality, and they're reading it all off a teleprompter.
Yeah, CNN reporters and newscasters have been caught actually admitting that in the lift. Not knowing they were recorded.
They figure there's nothing anybody can do about it at this point.
Yeah, what absolute scumbags. Yeah,
they're not doing a very good service to humanity.
What I love is Fox News generally is reporting the truth, and CNN is reporting bullshit. And Fox News has got almost 3 times as many views as CNN. I love it.
Yeah, that does help. So I guess the question comes up, since this is a global weather control system that they've got in place, why would they not be, giving a really hard time to anybody with a Cloudbuster or a translator?
Well, their top scientists, being the most clever people on the planet, don't believe it works.
Okay. So even though they can see the effects of it, they haven't noticed that it's doing this?
Basically, yes. Trevor James Constable went to China, and also in the USA. They spent millions of dollars to bring the world's top scientists to a place in the States that suffered from terrible smog for years. And Trevor James Constable wrote a telegram to every one of them saying, "The week that you meet, there will be no smog." And they laughed. And sure enough, they met up to discuss the problem of smog, and they had to abandon the meeting. All this is documented. It was dead funny. They abandoned the meeting because there was no smog.
Interesting. You know, in the U.S., I know of somebody that, as close acquaintance, who developed one of these unusual technologies that would get rid of smog, and he deployed it near a big city in the U.S., and it worked. And they found him and got him to stop and said that if he wanted to stay alive, he would not do that again.
Yeah.
And I know other people that have tried to do environmentally beneficial projects, and they had money behind it, and they were visited the day after they made the plan and showed recordings of their voices, and they could manipulate those recordings to have them admitting to any crime they wanted. And they said if they continued that project, they'd be in prison for life. And if they had any other ideas of projects, they would have to check with them first.
Yes.
So I think it's really interesting that they don't believe in the cloudbusters and translators, at least yet. Huh?
I have on video, I went to CERN in Switzerland, Geneva.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I'm speaking to a scientist, telling him what we can do with ether. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, ether doesn't exist.
Okay. That pretty much ends the discussion, I guess, right?
Yeah. So when someone said I'm changing the weather with ether, they can laugh all they want. But that's my protection. You can take me to any court in the land and prosecute me for changing the weather with a translator, and I'll hold I'll hold a 20-inch pipe up and I'll say, do you honestly think I can change the weather with this?
Yeah, in fact, I remember in high school and junior high, we learned that in the dark ages, when people didn't know anything, and because they didn't have 3-stage rockets and science, they actually believed there was something called ether. We were taught that. But now we know that that's all superstition and nonsense.
Isn't it interesting that the fastest internet, which is almost instant, I can be on my phone, send a photograph to Facebook, and I'm on my desktop, that photo goes through the phone system, through a telegraph, 300 miles away through the processing computer, which is the server, and sends it all the way back to my computer, and it takes a split second. The moment I send it, it's on Facebook, and they call it the Ethernet.
Yeah, that is very interesting. Sure, they would say it's a total coincidence. They just needed a good name.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, as far as the purpose of this solution goes, it's obviously good for ending droughts and floods and things like that. What about severe storms, tornadoes, and that sort of thing?
Yeah. I've got
hurricanes,
Absolutely. I've got all of the videos of weather forecasts, ongoing storm deployments, and the end result of our deployments for a number of hurricanes and typhoons. One of them was one of the biggest on record on the planet, called Typhoon Nepartak, and it was in Asia. And it went over Thailand, and it was heading towards China, and we split it in two. On the video it shows we hit it on one side, it exploded to one side, and then we split it through the middle. From 320 kilometers an hour to 40 kilometers an hour in approximately 12 to 14 hours.
What happens with the massive amounts of toxic solids, dried blood cells, toxic metals, all these things that are being dumped out of airplanes worldwide, and they generally end up falling and poisoning the ground and the water and the people? What happens to all those particulates with your technology?
Well, I've got two answers for that. One is, for example, Morgellons disease. I've had 3 different people say to me, when the fibres are dropping and have deployed, it turns into like a white slushy goo. So the etheric flow does something serious to it, and it disintegrates.
Okay.
I haven't had that tested under a laboratory, but they said they've seen Morgellons fibres that stays like a shiny cobweb, but these things just fell to pieces in like a white mulchy goo, and that's on 3 separate occasions. The other thing is, Willem Reich did what he called the Oranor experiment with a sample of radiation, which he put into an orgone box, and in that box were 2 rats. Those rats should have died within hours, and yet they lived to be quite old, in fact, and lived a healthy life. But the radiation was transmitted or translated, which is where the word translator comes from, into a 500-mile radius, and people around that area developed radiation sickness. Now, he never did that experiment again, but the lesson learnt was this, that the etheric flow and charge will actually disintegrate radiation. And if it can neutralize radiation, the etheric charge or orgone charge can actually negate the bad effects of even things like chemtrails.
Right. So certainly one of the main purposes, it sounds like, of the solution that you're talking about is to negate both the toxic effects of the chemtrails and the storms and droughts that they're causing.
Yes. We can put in etheric blockage. One of them is on my screen now on Weather Online. There's over 4,000 miles of a flow of a cloud formation, which is about 500 miles across, and it won't come into the UK. It heads from the southwest and goes right up to Ireland and starts curling round to Northern Europe. That never happens unless we deploy southwest and block it.
What would it take logistically with your teams and everything to eliminate the negative effects of the poisoning from chemtrails worldwide?
Well, in the same way that plants flourish around translators and cloudbusters, the etheric flow through the atmosphere and in the rains makes that rain. It changes something in it that makes it really healthy. So when the rain comes down, the plants seem to have an affinity with the rain that's been treated in that way. We've had people with translators in hot countries where they put a bowl of cool water outside for the cat and the dog to drink, and they'll drink it. But for some reason, these particular cats will crawl up the tripod of the translator and wait for the drops of water to come out. Even though there's a bowl of water to drink on the floor, they want the water that comes out the translator.
Oh, that's interesting. Now,
it takes something for a cat to hang on a steel tube and drink the water that comes out of it. It's a hard way to get a drink when there's one in front of you on the floor, and it won't touch the one on the floor. He wants the water from the translator, and that water that's put on a dying plant, that plant in 2 weeks will be flourishing like it's never had an issue.
So, I'm still wondering what you're doing. I think with the people you've got doing this now is protecting certain areas and diverting storms and droughts and things like that. What if you wanted to solve the issue for all the world at once? How much would that take?
I reckon we're covering 1/3 of the planet right now.
Okay.
And we've got.
So it's not beyond reach.
Absolutely not. No.
To do the whole thing.
When one right cloudbuster can cover 5,000 miles, you don't need many of them.
Do you think that at that point you might get some kind of a reaction from the power structure if they see all their programs failing?
There's an unusual thing about ether, and I've never been able to put my finger on it. It carries some form of protection, and it seems that no matter what's put in its way, if it's intended to happen, it definitely happens.
So in other words, just you don't worry about it if you're working with positive energy.
I'm not the slightest bit bothered. I know for a fact that Terry Lawton, the other activist, and myself, an attempt was made on our life. A driver left his side of the road and came on my side of the road and hit my car at 60 mile an hour head on. Major accident. We survived that. I mean, possibly we could have died, you know. The other guy nearly did die. He was airlifted to a hospital in a critical condition, and the other one took nearly an hour to cut him out of the car. But there's something about the etheric world that it has its own presence and it has its own intention.
Right. It may be time for the balance to shift back now.
Well, there is. It's like the universe. There's a war going on in the universe between two opposing energies. And
it's like that duality keeps the three-dimensional world going.
Yeah. And the elites, of course, take it to the extreme and think that every bad act produces another form of good.
Right. Well, in their definition, yeah.
Yeah. And they take it. I mean, how mentally unbalanced can you get that if you sacrifice a child, it's actually becoming a good thing then, and paedophilia.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the character of the people who are currently controlling the world.
Yeah. In fact,
I think most of the public would have a hard time really grasping that.
Yeah. Yesterday, I've seen a post and a video of somebody in politics in the USA, a well-known person, says that paedophilia is actually good for children.
Yeah, I'm sure they would. They've already said on television that mercury is good for you in vaccines and things like that.
And Europe's trying to get sex down to age 13.
Right.
And as the UK, a member of Parliament actually said that should be done.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, in Denmark, I think one of the top law enforcement officials said they should bring terrorists into the schools so that they could get educated and give their life experience for a contribution to.
Yeah. And don't complain when you're raped.
No, it's your fault, actually.
Yeah, and it's racist as well.
Exactly, yeah. So they're trying to get complete insanity on the way to extermination.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a need for the other side right now.
Interesting prophecy says the time of the end, right would be wrong and wrong would be right.
Yeah, that's already happened, I guess.
We've arrived.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully it's the end of a cycle and the beginning of something better.
We're on a massive, I love the word, is it paradigm?
Yeah.
There's a paradigm shift coming. And when it comes, it's going to be absolutely irreversible.
Yeah, I agree. The Earth has a capability of being a pretty nice place if things are done in harmony.
I have a dream as well, and my dream's this: with everything that's happened on this planet, the suffering, as we sit here now, there are children having arms and legs blown off.
Right.
It's terrible. And to be happy, we don't actually need a lot. We need a roof over our head, food, interesting work to do, a plan for the future, and your family around you. It's not a lot to ask, actually.
No, there's tremendous abundance, built into the whole system. I think it's just, it's been suppressed for a long time.
Yes.
Doesn't have to be.
And the world of bad entities, I believe they are there.
Yeah, I know that.
They hate the human race, and they hate the planet. They hate whales and dolphins and any form of life. And it's this war that's going on, that these entities, it's whatever the creator or creation is, they hate it. It's like it's their number one enemy.
Yeah, they're a little confused.
Yeah.
But I think the nice thing is that the positive power is infinitely stronger if people start waking up to it.
Yes. And you know, being an activist and trying to get people to be aware of chemtrails and the vaccines and the food additives and the control and the water additives is very draining, and it can get you down. And
It can. You know, interestingly enough, I think that you've been talking about the answer to that, because if you your intent has tremendous power, and if you see you as the person who's trying to help them, you get exhausted. There are healers that are doing that all the time, and they're totally wiped out after they do it. But if you see yourself clearly as not the source, and it's flowing through you but not from you, then you're actually recharged by the experience.
Yes.
Really different.
And this is what a lot of activists that have taken on my technology, and because I've developed it and made it even more effective, they say it's so empowering to actually do something. Instead of draining, it actually gives you this energy that you've actually done something. You know, and
that's a clue that it's a better approach.
It's positive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when you feel totally drained from doing something, it's trying to tell you that may not be the best way to accomplish what you have in mind.
Yep. Even Trevor James Constable said without the intent, his translators wouldn't work. And he had spectacular results. He proved that they did work.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the hidden things that we're not supposed to really understand, because if you knew the power of your own intent and start consciously moving it in a positive direction, the extermination plan would be over.
Yes. So I think, well, where do we go from here for the future? And I see some good things, really good things.
So what do you want to see happen? What are the next steps?
It's not just about weather and translators. It's on about healing, everything being healed.
Yes.
Which includes human thoughts, physical ailments.
Right.
Willem Reich even looked at trying to cure cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of his goals. That's when the pharmaceutical industry stepped in and locked him up for 2 years under false accusations.
Yeah, that was getting a little too threatening, right?
And of course, he died 2 weeks before he was due to be released from prison.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Interesting.
Can we just hold there for a second? I've got.
Go ahead. Take your time.
Yeah,
it's fine.
What I've got on my screen here now is Mallorca and Valencia, where there are massive NexRads.
Yes.
And Spain, they've been trying to induce a drought. They've set fires there using energy weapons.
Uh-huh.
Fact, you say it out of your mouth as though it's impossible. I assure you, that is a massive plan of theirs. They did it in California. People filming beams coming out from the sky and then fires hitting.
Yeah, I saw those pictures actually.
And one of the ways of manipulating the weather, they're blocking the rain. I'm watching rains come from the north, and as soon as it starts coming into Spain, these beams come out of these NexRad dishes. They are capacitive. In other words, they store up the energy like a microwave and then release it in beams. Radar does work. You can see what's in the atmosphere, but if you strip the ions out of it, then the rain falls.
Well, I noticed those beams in California when they were having those very unusual fires that targeted specific houses and burned them up at high temperatures.
Yeah.
That some of those beams that were triggering the fires were coming out of aircraft.
Yes. And they boast they've already got them. They show you photos of them, and they even got videos of deploying them and showing you how they can destroy something and set fire to it.
Yeah, exactly. And the fire burned very hot. I mean, I think the regular house fires they were saying they burned at what 1,200 degrees maximum, something like that.
Yeah.
And these fires were well over 2,000 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, the glass melted, aluminium wheels melted.
Yes, yes, even heavy steel melted as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And
But
plants right next to that heat were not even hot.
no, eucalyptus trees, which are highly flammable,
Those are
did not
explosive.
burn.
Right. Right. So they're just figuring nobody will notice.
No. And coming to positive things, there's a guy. I mean, anybody listening to this, type in YouTube Joe Sell. Now, Joe Sell ran a car on no petrol, and it wasn't HHO. We're not talking hydrogen. He had a special charged water canister. We're coming back to water again. A
Yes.
special charged water canister, and he'd start his engine on petrol, disconnect the fuel line, and a steel rod from the canister was bolted to the engine. And this is what happened. An etheric flow ran down the surface of the steel rod, and where there was a chaos compression decompression in the engine, it creates an explosion. And it also creates an implosion, which is more powerful than an explosion. And the
Joe
implosion,
Cell, you said CELL, cell like a cell.
JOECELL.
Okay.
Now, I have a friend that lives near Joe Cell in Australia. And one of the things that he had, the Men in Black visit him after a newspaper article, and he said, I am not using this technology for commercial reasons, I am only using it for myself. And they left him alone. And he's got some friends there, and they've done the same to their cars and tried to perfect it. But it stays in that close-knit unit. It's no threat.
Yeah.
The way they've done it is no threat commercially to the petroleum industry or the car industry.
Okay. So if people want to get anything from that, they're going to have to discover it on their own.
Yes. But one interesting thing happened, and that is that when it comes to a high volume of energy that is being used in the car starts to lose its weight and becomes weightless.
Yeah, there's some pretty interesting things going on there.
Which now comes to anti-gravity and the ball that the Nazis used, where they had two opposing vortexes of water inside with a current that produces another form of energy. Most unusual.
Right. Yeah, I was told that in the U.S. they perfected gravity control, meaning weightless flight and things, in the very early 1950s.
Yeah.
And they've had it since then.
But guess what? If you've got a right cloudbuster which works on an etheric charge, and the water's an etheric charge for the anti-gravity and the energy to run a car on, it sucks it dry. And one of the big problems that they will have, if a cloudbuster is pointing directly at one of these, that's a water-based cloudbuster, the thing will start to develop a catastrophic problem if it doesn't get out of the way quick.
What is a water-based cloudbuster? What does that mean?
It's the one with the tubes and translators do as well, is where water is sprayed in the back to create the etheric vortex within the tubes.
Now, depending on the effect that you want, sometimes you spray water and sometimes you don't, right, inside the tube?
Yeah, the golden rule with ether is this, and Tesla admitted this: ether always flows from a low potential to a high potential. And what I mean by that is, the more water that you put inside the translator, the higher the potential.
Okay.
So the higher the charge. For example, in the atmosphere, a high etheric potential is thunderstorms, hurricanes, tornadoes, high winds. High activity is a high etheric charge, a high etheric potential. A low etheric potential is no wind, calm days, sunshine, no clouds, drought, bad energy places, no life. And there's always a reaction between the two. So, for example, if there's a thunderstorm and you want to feed it, you would deploy a translator, uncap it, allow the flow to go, but no water. That will feed it because it's a lower potential than the high potential storm. Now,
okay, so you're directing energy into the storm, in other words.
It will. Well, the translator provides the link from the Earth to the storm, and it feeds the storm.
It feeds energy from the Earth into the storm.
In theory, yes. Putting it simply.
Okay.
Now, by putting water in a translator, if the translator's large enough, say a 6 foot by 9 inch tube, set up correctly for the radionics resonance, it will actually draw the energy from the storm because the translator is a higher potential than the storm.
If you have enough area with water sprayed in it.
Yes. Right? And that's why a large cloudbuster with a big water a water spray and a capacitor design will always suck the storm dry.
Okay.
But it's taken years to learn this. But once it's practiced and the penny's dropped, then it's just a formality to actually do the deployment.
What was being done wrong in the cases where people actually got hurt by early cloudbusters?
One of the things that Willem Reich didn't realise is that there is a product called DOR, which is deadly orgone. Now, we notice this when we deploy. You get these low black dark clouds, and it separates the energy, the negative energy, which is created, by the way, by ionizers and things like HARP. The positive ions are bad news. There's nothing positive about them. Negative ions are good for you, related to ozone, which cleans the air. So Willem Reich, he became ill one day because he grabbed the tubes of the cloudbuster, and running the water to Earth helps to stop that. The water must run back to Earth, not keep accumulating in the capacitor. It's a negative form of energy, and what you should do is earth it. You have a copper wire and it's earthed to Earth, and that negative energy is dissipated back into the Earth.
Okay, but the negative energy doesn't do anything bad in the Earth, in other words.
No, it's part of the natural process of the etheric flow. But if you let that build up and then you become the contact between the cloudbuster or the translator and Earth, that energy will go into your body and it'll cause problems.
Okay.
One of the ways to get rid of it is to have 2 copper stakes in the Earth with copper wires, and you hold in one hand one wire and the other hand the other wire, and it's like a discharge between you and the Earth. The other way is to go into a shower and let water run over you for at least 15 minutes. And
right, because then you're grounded as well, right?
Yes, the etheric flow of the water will then draw the DOR out, and that dissipates back into the Earth.
So you're describing first aid for bad energy contamination?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. I wonder what other... You were saying that the long-term plan, really what you want to see happening, goes beyond just weather issues. And what I'm wondering is, what's going to be the next way in which this same energy is used for... Just let me give you an example. I think there are a lot of clues for good things that we could do based on what the negative power structure is doing already. We just have to reverse what they're doing. So when they set up cell towers, NextRad stations, and other generators of negative energy, one of the objectives that they have there, according to whistleblowers and people that have worked in those organizations and escaped, at least for a while, is they said that the 5G that you mentioned that's rolling out first in the cities, and then they hope to cover the whole planet via satellite with it. One of the main objectives is mind control, and before they finish extermination, I think they want to spread mass insanity to the greatest degree possible. So if you take that as guidance, reverse it, there should be a way to use the positive energy to take crazy people and make them sane again. What do you think about that?
Yeah, there's a number of areas really. One is the next rads that you manipulate the weather. We've noticed if you point a translator at that, it almost stops its effect on weather control, and sometimes, in some cases, completely stopped it. Health reasons, a lot of illness of the human body is because of that negative energy of DOR. We live in a terrible atmosphere of radiation, particulates that go into the brain and the blood system, chemicals. I mean, there's that many frequencies of radiation, and that's what...
Well, and that's without even mentioning negative thought patterns, because those draw that energy as well, right?
Yes. Well, the weird thing about thought, and the Egyptians went into this, that thought creates reality.
Yeah, as long as you believe it and it has emotion behind it. Yeah, that's right.
Yes. And also things like energy. If you look at the Egyptians, they had tools that looked identical to my translators. Identical, and they charged them inside the pyramids.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. In fact, I don't know if you're aware of it, but they just discovered a whole new complex of pyramids older and bigger than Egypt, and it's in Bosnia.
Yes.
We had the man who discovered that complex on the show a couple of weeks ago.
And just to change the subject slightly, there's a lot of videos on YouTube of giants made of stone. And it sounds absolutely ridiculous. And yet, a surgeon in Egypt, there was a statue that's on the floor on its back, its legs broken off, and in its side is a hole. And he looks in the hole, and he can see the remains of the lungs, the bones of the rib cage, the kidney, and the liver. And it's fossilized. And
yeah, in other words, that size person did exist.
Yes, the thing is 35 foot tall.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And he says, I can't believe, he says that thing was alive once. It's not a stone statue. That thing lived.
Yeah, and generally people think anything they don't understand must be terribly evil. But that's not always the case.
Yeah.
There's more
and the scriptures mentions the great giants of the earth.
Right.
And evil spirit creatures that actually came down to the earth and formed enormous bodies for themselves.
Right. And even small ones can be just as bad.
Yeah.
It's the quality of the energy.
Yeah. The Nephilim, they called them.
Right.
They called them Fallas. That's where the word Falla comes from, because in one punch it could kill a man and fall him like a tree.
Yeah. So how do you think the next area of using this positive orgone or chi energy or prana, whatever you want to call it, beyond the weather, so that... See, tell me what you think of this. Actually, there's so many things to look at, but this one I think is important. The atmosphere around the Earth, regular science identifies nitrogen and oxygen and the main gases that form it, but there's obviously a subtle etheric atmosphere around the Earth as well, which you have been describing. I think there's also an atmosphere of thought around the Earth that is almost like interacts with the thoughts that the human beings are having and affects reality. So what about the idea of using this positive energy to affect the atmosphere of thought around the planet?
You cannot separate it. It's actually all part of it. The etheric flow, for example, in the ether, absolute fact, in the ether is the instruction for DNA.
Right.
Certain tests where pyramids, organ generation, where it's high, plants have started to develop that's supposed to be extinct. Your DNA is the hard drive, the ether is the instruction, or your software. So that's one of the interesting things. It's a very positive energy, and it separates the good from the bad. That's what ether does. It's omnipresent. Nothing can exist without it, and it seems to expose the difference between good and bad. That's the feeling I get. Even in the sky, it separates the negative ions from positive ions. The positive ions develop in black clouds. The negative ions develop as ozone, clear blue skies. In fact, they called it the cobalt blue sky after deployment. That was Trevor and Willem Reich.
Yeah.
And one really interesting thing, when you fire up a cloudbuster, this is what happens. It's a form of lightning in slow motion. And that's all on there's a semi-scientific page on cloudbusting and experiments. And that's what they concluded. And the blue, when lightning occurs in a sudden release of energy, they say that's an etheric release, or a charge of etheric energy released.
Yeah.
It produces from the CO2 an O3 molecule, which is ozone.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful clearing quality in ozone. And that's where the cobalt blue comes from. And so lightning in slow motion, when we deploy a translator or a cloudbuster, the actual ozone increases in the atmosphere.
Right, similar to lightning.
Yes, it's exactly the same process.
Right. I think I've heard about lightning increasing the nitrogen richness in the soil as well.
Oh, just excuse me 1 minute,
yes.
Richard, sorry.
Go ahead. So, at this point, if I have a couple of quick questions. One is, if people want to learn more about what you're doing or follow it, is there a way for them to do that?
Yes, we have a website page on Facebook where we have teams that do deployments. They can you can, or on this video, you can provide my contact details, email address. Shall I give my email address here?
Sure. Why don't you give it out for people?
Okay, it's IPI, which is Indigo Papa Indigo, and it's H for Harry, and Rhodes, RHODES, so that's IPIHRhodes @hotmail.com.
Okay, and I'm assuming there's not really a website right now, but there might be a Facebook page, right?
Yes, it's a secret page on Facebook.
Okay, all right, so if they want to get in touch with you, they need to do it by email primarily.
Yes, and if anybody wants to be on the team, I mean, I've done videos on YouTube, but the secrets of this technology is not given in public. Never.
Right. But some general ideas of it working and examples of that, they can see that on free YouTube videos, right?
Yeah, there's lots and lots of videos on how to deploy them. The interesting thing about cloudbusting and translators, you could have a translator in your hand. We give deployment instructions. It takes 2 minutes to set up and deploy, and you're working with it straight away. You don't have to know how and why it works.
Right.
And I've said before, you go and buy an automatic vehicle, before you turn the key and drive off, you don't read all the design structures and the gear ratios. You don't need to know all that. All you need to know is where to turn the key, the steering wheel, and how to drive. That's it.
Yes, exactly. Okay, well, I would like people to get in touch with you if they need to, but they can certainly watch the YouTube videos, and we can stay in touch and see how your program goes forward at this point. I think it's really interesting what's happening in South Africa, and I'm assuming that you're going to keep working there until things are back to normal. Is that the plan at this point?
We've provided Africa with an extra 3 months of water. Fact.
Right.
The teams deployed there, exactly the places and times we deployed is where the water came, and that's where the reservoirs filled up. In fact, I was in a Skype call with a gentleman in Cape Town, and it was 10:30, and he said in the morning it was blue skies. I said we started deploying at 10 o'clock, and at 10:30 he took his camera outside with his headphones on and his laptop, and I've got this on video. He's got massive black rain clouds appearing from the horizon, and they came right over his head and produced rains.
So if South Africa is going to remain as a target for whatever reason that they want to create drought there and shut down the cities, are you going to have a permanent presence that makes that not happen?
Yes, there is going to be a right cloudbuster built in South Africa, and it will be left there to be deployed.
Okay, sounds great. So they're going to have to figure out some alternative to their plan at this point.
Yes. He's a point in hand, and I know both of us have something in common. Money is a means to an end. And you're looking for money to get your projects done, which is an incredible project, by the way, and it's all to do with healing. And this is also to do with healing of the planet and more. And if anybody wants to make a donation, please do. Every penny or dollar will be very, very, very well spent.
I completely agree. How do they do that, Harry? What's the best way?
They can email me, and I will give them instructions. We have a PayPal account.
Okay, good.
It's normally people that once they hear about this technology, they cannot resist but get involved. And we've never had anybody who's disappointed. People get very emotional.
I would like to see large numbers of people with modest donations be able to support your work, and I'd also really like to see people with large resources come in and give it a boost as well.
Yeah. One of the people that's involved with this in Africa owns 3 gold mines. So
that could be useful.
Yeah. And it's I just know I've never failed yet in 5 years. You're actually speaking to the person that organised the end of the California drought last year and created a super balloon.
Yeah, what's the plan from this point forward in California? Because I know they're still trying to burn it up at the moment.
Yeah, they are. They have incredible weather modification equipment. The HARP station just in Alaska is constantly firing up. It dries the upper atmosphere out. In fact, it heats it that much. Sometimes you get plasma in the upper atmosphere. We are talking of thousands of degrees.
Yeah.
So it's an ongoing battle. The funny thing is, they spend millions, hundreds of millions of pounds on jet aircraft, the fuel, the additives, the pilots, and yet with something for $180, a lot of that can be dropped hundreds and hundreds of square miles, and 2 or 3 people can drop thousands of square miles of it.
You have these devices, the translators primarily, but I assume you also have cloudbusters available.
Yes.
And who can buy those things? Who do you want to sell them to?
They provided at cost price.
No, but I mean, who do you want to buy those? Because you said you don't want people to just be using those freely with no plan, right?
No, that's right. It would be somebody who's aware of chemtrails or the agenda that's going on, and these people would be expected to be part of the team. And when we know we can trust them, they'll be provided with the equipment at cost price. and then they are put into a specific local team. When I say local, there might be 3 people in 500 square miles. Sometimes there are people that live very close to each other, and they physically meet up as a team.
And they get instructions of exactly what to do with the equipment.
Yes, absolutely. There's
okay.
Nothing particularly complex. It's how and when to deploy, simply.
All right. So I have a couple of other things to go over with you in the break here after we say goodbye. And in the meantime, I want to encourage people to watch your YouTube videos. And if you develop a personal interest in this, send Harry an email. And we'll keep in close touch and keep up with your work. And I really appreciate your being here. So hold on for a minute and we'll go over what we need to in the break here. So